Welcome to the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to an all-new episode of the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Brian here is a seasoned tax attorney with over 25 years of experience helping individuals and business owners resolve serious IRS problems, including audits, tax debt, and representation before the U.S. Tax Court. He's based in Tampa. He's been representing taxpayers nationwide, focusing on federal tax controversies, debt resolution, defending clients and audits. You name it, Brian's done it. And in today's episode, we're breaking down what really happens when you don't file your tax returns and why waiting can make the situation much worse, which is a Captain Obvious type of answer there. Brian, let's start first off. Good to see you, buddy. What exactly counts as not filing in the eyes of the IRS?
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike. Really, it's as simple as just that, not filing. And what that means is there's certain filing deadlines. Everybody knows April 15th. That's kind of a magic date. They know for businesses, it's almost always a month before that there's a certain set time that you have to file. But not filing simply means just that. They're not submitting a return, or in some cases, not filing for an extension. So in either instance, there can be some pretty severe ramifications.
You know, let me piggyback on it. Some people think that if they can't pay, it's better to not file at all, which why would they have that mentality? But why is that a big mistake? Explain it to folks.
I think the focus with the IRS is, for most people, is they want my money, which of course they do, unless you're the kind of person that tends to get a refund every year. But most people feel that, look, if I can't pay it, why file? And that's really probably one of the biggest mistakes that literally millions of people a year make. And that's partly because the IRS will assess a penalty based upon the unpaid tax, as well as interest on the unpaid tax for somebody that fails to file. And again, that means either missing the deadline, April 15th is what most people understand, or not getting an extension. And then even at that point, maybe missing the extension filing. So there's an automatic penalty based upon the unpaid tax that will be assessed if you do not file timely.
Are there any other consequences? Because you mentioned April 15th, but then you mentioned an extension process. Walk us through that, and are there added consequences of missing the 15th or the extension deadline?
Well, the extension is fairly simple. The IRS website has a form that you can fill out and submit. For most people, if they're using a CPA or an accountant or third party, they'll submit that for them. And in most cases, automatically. In other words, once you align yourself with a good CPA or accounting firm, they will automatically do it, even if you don't ask or even if it's not necessary. The biggest thing is just making sure that you don't miss that deadline for filing the extension, which is just simply a single piece of paper. I do want to add to that if it's a married couple filing married joint, at least in the past, not necessarily a newlywed couple, but if they filed married joint in the past, it's only necessary that one of the individuals, usually the first person listed on the return, that individual file for the extension. Both do not need to file for the extension.
Yeah, good to know. Let me ask you, somebody has for several years, they haven't filed. What steps do the IRS usually take to get their attention?
A lot of times they'll send a letter, different types of notices. The IRS has hundreds, if seemingly thousands of types of notices, but they'll send a notice saying, hey, we think you forgot to file, or did you miss something? And in that notice, they give you an opportunity to explain why you didn't file if you have a valid reason. And for some people, they have no income. I mean, it's called the income tax, and that's because it's based upon income. And so in certain situations, somebody has no income, they don't have a filing requirement. So the IRS letter will say, why did you not file? And if that's the case, if you reply to that, they'll do a double check verification on their end, and that closes that out. Mm-hmm. Other instances, I will say that sometimes the IRS will send a letter and it says, look, we have information in our system showing that you have income for this year in question. And it's usually a couple years past. It's never the same previous year. And they'll say, you didn't file. And so we're preparing a return based solely upon your income information. And if you don't respond, we're going to submit this and make this your tax return. And you don't want that to happen.
Brian, we've talked about like kind of like the standard run of the mill with folks that file their taxes. What about business owners or self-employed people? How can skipping tax filings cause them even bigger problems?
Well, in the same way it is for an individual, but for a business, usually you're talking about, in some cases, larger sources of income for a small business owner than what's going to be reflected on their personal return. Um, and for businesses, it really can be an issue when it's involving failing to file informational returns. See, most people think tax returns, just the average person, is like an individual Form 1040 tax return. Everybody files on April 15th, and you're going to owe or get a refund and so forth. There's a whole nother area of returns called informational returns. And they're not returns that are going to necessarily demonstrate whether you owe money or do a refund, but they just provide information to the IRS that they use. And those returns are required to ascertain the correct amount, say for a personal return or a corporate return. An example of an informational return would be a business that has employees, W 2 wages. Say they have 10, 20, 50 employees. At the end of the year, they have to file all those W 2s as well as a transmittal letter of a W 3, and they have to file that to actually the Social Security Administration, which then in turn sends it to the IRS, because the IRS uses that information to do a cross reference for individuals. So for businesses, it's not always a return that's going to demonstrate whether or not the business owes taxes or not, which is important. But there are informational returns that, if they fail to file, can result in penalties. Well, hundreds of thousands. I've seen it. In fact, I'm working a few cases like that right now.
So let me ask you then, there's a flip over here because some of these situations, I guess when you don't file, could potentially turn into a criminal matter. Is that the case?
It is. Most people know about Wesley Snipes, okay, the famous action actor from, I guess, in the 90s and so forth. He was in a lot of really huge movies. And that was here in Florida. People know that he was prosecuted for what the average person says tax fraud. Actually, he wasn't convicted of tax fraud per se. He wasn't convicted of not paying taxes. He was convicted of failing to file personal income tax returns. And failing to file a personal income tax return is a federal misdemeanor, punishable by up to 6 months in federal prison. And people say, well, what's the threshold? I thought you said earlier if I didn't have income, I didn't need to file. That's correct. But if you have income above a certain level, whether you owe money or do a refund, you have a legal obligation to file, and failing to do so can result in criminal prosecution.
Hmm. Interesting to know about that Wesley Snipes case. So then let me ask you, person listening to this right now, they haven't filed in several years. They're behind. What's the safest way that you would recommend to them to catch up?
When people call me and they say, look, it's been years since I filed, I don't know where to start, I can't sleep at night and so forth. And I say, okay, well, let's set a time to get together, or if it's a virtual client, because as you know, I have clients all over the country, I'll set up a Teams call or a Zoom call, and I'll talk with them, and I'll just get a feel for what kind of income they had during that time frame. And from that point, I'm able to obtain different types of transcripts or documents from the IRS, primarily what's called a wage and income transcript. And that will show what was reported to the Internal Revenue Service under that person's name and social security number. Or for a business, there's another slight variation of that, but it's information what was reported paid to that business in a particular calendar year. And that's a starting point. And then from there, we can make a determination what years need to be filed, because again, not every year necessarily needs to be filed. And at that point, make a referral, because I work closely with a couple of different CPA firms, and depending upon my client's needs, I'll make the appropriate referral and then take the next step, which is to get the returns done.
Brian, I would love for you to expand just a little bit more. Explain why getting an attorney to step in can help without making the IRS, come down harder on someone. Sometimes people try to go at it alone. Why is it easier using someone like you as an attorney?
First thing I tell people is this. People say, well, if I hire a tax lawyer, isn't it going to make me look guilty or make me look like I'm trying to avoid very serious consequences? And I say, well, actually, I think what it shows is that you're serious about resolving the matter, because people aren't going to come in and retain me and just generally ignore going forward at that point. Although it's happened in the past, it's pretty rare. It's kind of like somebody that's sick going to a doctor. If you go in and you see the doctor, pay for an exam, medicine, treatment, and so forth, generally you're going to kind of continue down that course of action. But as much as anything, it shows the IRS that you're serious about getting the matter resolved. And what I also tell people with its unfiled returns and where there's a clear filing obligation is I will say to them, you don't have an accounting problem. You have a legal problem that involves accounting.
Mm, I love that. So let's land the plane here, Brian. For someone that's listening to this right now, they're behind. You just gave them the advice on behind, but they're afraid to deal with this. What's the very first move that they should do, according to Brian?
Well, just to pick up the phone and give a call. I mean, it's, as I tell people, it ain't going to fix itself. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to wake up one day and magically it's all over. And another thing is, it's always better to approach the IRS before they approach you. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean some type of computer generated notice that they may have received. The IRS computers spit those things out by the thousands or hundreds of thousands a day, which is not anything to not be concerned about. But you don't want to wait till an IRS revenue officer or a revenue agent contacts you directly and says, hey, we need to set a time to meet. And you want to avoid that, because it's a lot better to go to them before they come to you. But just give a call to our office. Again, we have a toll-free number. We'll be happy to talk to you about your situation. And given the fact that I've done this for so long, I really know what questions to ask to get through it very quickly, at least initially. And if it turns out it's not something that needs to be pursued, we'll tell you that. And if it's something that needs to be pursued and corrected, then we'll give you an idea of how we'll go about doing it for you.
Brian, thank you so much for the time and insights on all this. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
And thank you to everybody for listening to another episode of the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast. Listen, you've fallen behind on filing your tax returns. The worst thing you can do, Brian just said it, the worst thing you can do is wait. His team is waiting. Go to tampataxrelief.com to schedule a consultation. It's absolutely free. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave us a comment and review on this episode, or share it with somebody who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.